Hello, and I'm here today with Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg to talk about his faith journey and his Catholic faith and how that influences his political life. So I'd like to thank Sir Jacob for participating in this.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming and setting everything up.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump straight into some questions. My first question is regarding your faith in your early years, and how has your Catholic upbringing and education shaped the way you see the world?
Well, I was brought up in a Catholic household. I had a very Catholic governess who went through the Catechism with me. She went to Mass every morning in the old rite. She seemed to be so old. You know how it is when you're little. She seemed to be several hundred years old, as far as I could tell. She'd probably been there at the Council of Trent personally. In fact, she was in her 80s, so she was of a reasonable age. And we just went to Mass every Sunday. That was what we did. I confess I didn't like going. I wanted to stay at home and play rather than go to Mass. But I never had any doubt. I've never thought that the teaching of the Church wasn't true. I just, as a child, didn't always want to go. How has it influenced me? Well, I've always rather feel, as Evelyn Waugh put it, somebody said to him, "Mr. Waugh, how come as a Catholic you're such a difficult person?" And he said, "Just think how much worse I'd be if I weren't." And that's my view. People say to me, "Come on, talk about being a Catholic, aren't you the most frightful hypocrite because you do this, that and the next thing and you're not in favour of overseas aid," or whatever it is. And I said, well, just think how much worse I would be if I weren't, that Catholicism helps one to be a little bit better.
Interesting. You mentioned that initially you didn't enjoy going to Mass particularly. Can you remember a certain point in your life where you started to go more out of your own will rather than...
Well, certainly once I had my first communion, I wanted to go. My children have all had their first communion at 7, and I think I was 9 when I had mine, so I was a little bit late. And from then on, I was very happy to go to Mass. And once I started learning about the Reformation, which I do remember learning about the Reformation when I was a schoolboy, and thinking, oh my goodness, being Catholic is quite important, it matters.
That's interesting. So would you say that your coming to faith, true faith, was somewhat of an intellectual journey rather than...
No, I'd say it was more habit than intellectual. The intellectual stage comes later. But I never had any difficulty accepting that the body of Christ is the real presence of the body of Christ, that it is innerly changed into Christ's physical body. I never thought that was a difficult thing to believe. And I now find it easier to intellectualize that I'm with St. Paul, so I should be, that if the resurrection is true, then what happened is enormously important, and if it's not true, it's all nonsense. But if the resurrection's true, which I believe, then all the other miracles are easy. They're not, either there are miracles or there aren't. The biggest miracle is the resurrection. If that's true, the other miracles, including the daily one, the one that takes place across the world hundreds of thousands of times every week, the real presence is an easy miracle to believe in.
That's interesting because I was talking to my parish priest just yesterday, and he was saying that transubstantiation is the issue that when people are coming into the parish as newcomers, it's the most common objection to the Church. But I think I too have found that it's a logical understanding of Scripture.
It completely puzzles me. First of all, it's what Christ says. And I just don't understand why you find that difficult to believe if you believe in the resurrection. If you don't believe in the resurrection, what are you doing being Catholic?
Yes, yeah. Okay, so moving on to how your faith influences your public life. What does it mean for you to live out your Catholic faith openly, particularly in Parliament?
Yes, I think the public, I don't believe in privacy laws. I think privacy laws are a lot of nonsense, and Parliament never actually passed them. They came in through the European Convention on Human Rights. And the reason Parliament never passed them is that the British people didn't want laws that covered up what politicians did that they shouldn't be doing, which we now have, I'm sorry to say. But I therefore think if you are standing for public office, your electorate's entitled to know about you. It's why I was willing to do the Discovery programme, meet the Rees-Moggs. I'm very happy to be open about who I am beyond my views on the manifesto. And being Catholic is an important part of who I am, and I think it's perfectly reasonable for voters to know that.
If we dig deeper, I'm going to slightly edit the question I had prepared here, but in relation to politics and the political expectation, particularly when you're within a party system, did you ever feel, I'm sure you did feel some tension there with your Catholic beliefs to some extent?
We're very lucky that the moral issues are free votes, and therefore, as a Member of Parliament, even as a Member of the Cabinet, I never had to vote against the fundamental teaching of the Catholic Church, and I'm thinking particularly in relation to the life issues, that I never had to vote in favour of abortion, I never had to vote in favour of euthanasia. So on the major issues, there was fortunately a position for Members of Parliament to stick to their religious beliefs, and those are few and far between. Most of the daily work of a politician is not religious. Should corporation tax go up or down is not a matter where the teaching of the Church is particularly relevant or helpful, but is life from the point of conception to natural death is fundamental, and those are free votes. So I never found it was too difficult.
I know you say that these issues are free votes, of course. Which of these issues did you find most problematic or most concerning when you were more present as an MP?
Well, I think the greatest tragedy of our time is that 250,000 babies a year are killed. And we have a population crisis partly because we are killing babies, and I think this is just a terrible situation for the country to be in. And I think in a couple of 100 years' time, people will look back on our abortion laws with the same horror that people look back on our slavery laws. I think it is fundamentally wrong. And I wish that the British public thought otherwise. I recognise that they don't have my view on this. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't express it, and shouldn't also be very clear that I think it is the greatest problem of our time. I mean, occasionally people stand up in church and say the greatest problem of our time is climate change. This is nonsense. It's practically heresy in my view. The greatest problem of our time is killing people.
And I know you've said before that these matters, such as gay marriage, abortion, the public are so to one side on these issues that the reversal will never occur. But do you think that, not thinking in the short term, but in the long term, that the UK could move in the direction that America has recently?
Well, I think if you take gay marriage, it is a relationship approved by the state. It is not, and it cannot be, the sacrament of marriage. The sacrament of marriage is not determined by Parliament. This is exactly the argument Thomas More had in relation to the marriage of Anne Boleyn, that he made it clear ultimately that Parliament could no more make a sacrament than it could make a dog a cat. And therefore it is not a sacrament, it is something that the state approves and calls marriage. And I think we have to be very clear that it is not and cannot be a sacrament, because that is a matter for God rather than the House of Commons. And even though I'm a great believer in parliamentary sovereignty doesn't outrank God. So that's the position there. And if the state wishes to regulate relationships that are not sacramental, that's a matter for the state. It's not something that I object to it doing. That's a very different matter from trying to regulate a sacrament. And I think it's a pity the word marriage is used. I also think it's a pity that the state has undermined marriage by making divorce so easily, which has had a terrible consequence on society. I think the liberal reforms of the 1960s have had many problems for society, and particularly for for the family. On abortion, I think there is a change in mood. I think that when Parliament voted to allow babies to be killed up to the point of delivery, there was revulsion. This is destroying babies that could live easily outside the womb. It's no different from infanticide. It was a deeply wicked thing for Parliament to have done. And I think the country at large is revolted by that. And so I think there is support, and opinion polls seem to show this, for reducing the number of weeks. And that would be a good thing. Do I think we'll get to the stage in my political lifetime where they've got to in some states in America? No, I don't. I don't think the British people want to go down that route. But I still think it's important for me to say exactly what I think and to reinforce the teaching of Holy Mother.
You mentioned as well on these issues the example of climate change and climate change in churches. And I think especially if you go to some of the Anglican churches in this country, you see a lot of politics within the church. Do you think that politics does have a place, not just in the church building, but should the church engage with these issues in a political way?
I think it's very dangerous because the church has the magisterium. The magisterium of the church is its infallible teaching that has evolved over centuries. And it is given to the church by the Holy Ghost. And that is authoritative. When you're talking about politics, it is speculative. Maybe right, maybe wrong. Policy option A may work, policy option B may not work. And this was really settled in the Middle Ages, when you had all the rows between the Holy Roman Emperor and the papacy as to who was more powerful. And it's the beginning of the 14th century. You have the high point of papal claims to power in Pope Boniface VIII's papal bull Unum Sanctum, which says all authority, secular and spiritual, comes from the Pope. And therefore the Pope can do what he likes. Unfortunately, the Pope's politics don't work. And the papacy gets into terrible trouble by being political. It makes life extremely difficult for the papacy and detracts from the papacy's spiritual authority. And therefore I think the church should be very careful not to move into areas where its teaching is not authoritative but is speculative, where it doesn't have a unique authority. In the matters defined by the First Vatican Council, where the Holy Father is infallible, so what is the one clearly infallible statement that has been made is on the Assumption. That is an infallible statement of the Church. The Immaculate Conception is formalised just before the First Vatican Council, so although it is an infallible statement, it's not one post the Council. That is an authoritative statement which Catholics must believe. Whether we should charge more or less for electricity to discourage the use of it is a matter of opinion, not an infallible statement. And it is not, I think, helpful for the authority of the Church for it to go into these sorts of issues in any great detail, because it doesn't know any better than anybody else.
You're clearly not afraid of touching on controversial topics and having strong opinions. Do you think that that's something that's rooted in your Catholic faith, or do you think that it's part of your nature in general? Oh gosh, it's probably a weakness rather than a strength in terms of Catholic faith, isn't it? That I ought to have more humility and becoming modesty. And that, of course, is an issue, I think, for the Church, that the Church is a human organisation, but with a divine purpose. And it attracts people who are very humble, but their flock need authority, need the magisterium. And that sometimes is hard for the Church. It's lucky I'm not a cleric, because I'd be probably more Thomas Becket than I would be Pope Benedict. And just going back to your mention, or my mention rather, of the Anglican Church in this country, how do you view the Anglican Church as an institution? I know that you said that you would likely or possibly be Anglican if it wasn't for your family tradition. I think I've heard you possibly say that before.
There are a number of Anglican clerics in the Rees-Mogg family, including John Rees, who married Mary Mogg and became John Rees-Mogg, who was a cleric. I'm very lucky I'm a Catholic. I'm in favour of there being an established church. I wish the Anglican Church well. I think it is a good thing that the civic ceremonies of the United Kingdom have a religious element. High point of this, of course, the coronation, which is essentially unchanged from the coronation that St Dunstan used for King Edgar when he was crowned the first King of England at Bath. So yes, it is a good thing, but it is not the Catholic Church.
Would you say you have certain concerns with the direction that the Anglican Church is moving in? And do you think that Catholicism in the UK can play a role in mitigating?
I've always been very careful about saying anything to advise the Anglican Church. It's not my church. And I never voted on anything to do with the Anglican Church when I was a member of Parliament. I wish it well. I want Christianity in this country to be as strong as possible. But I think that the Catholic Church is the successor to St. Peter, that this is the church that Christ founds. So I have absolute confidence that the Catholic Church is the church to which I wish to belong and which I support.
Yeah. Okay, so moving away from politics slightly to the topic of family life. I know you have a very large family. How do you think that Catholic teaching has influenced your role as a father and a family man?
Well, the children have all been brought up in the Catholic faith. I've done the catechism with all 6 of them, which we used to do at Sunday lunch. They were quite pleased when there were guests for Sunday lunch, because then they got away without doing the catechism, unless it was my mother or a priest, in which case we still carried on with catechism. So I've ensured that the children know about the faith. All my boys have served at Mass in the extraordinary form rather than in the ordinary form, so that helps them. The great thing about serving in the extraordinary form is it's actually extremely difficult, and therefore you have to learn a lot about what is happening in Mass to be able to do it, and it keeps children focused. So it's been a very important part of their lives. They still all go to Mass on Sundays without particular complaint, and I hope it will be an important support for them throughout their lives.
Talking of the Mass and your views on the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass, how do you see that as a preference, or do you see the issue as more divisive than that?
I see it as a preference. I'm very happy to go to the Novus Ordo as long as it's done properly. And one of the things Pope Francis said when he restricted the extraordinary form was that he expected the ordinary form to be done properly. Well, you go to lots of churches and it isn't done as it should be done. But there are all sorts of things that aren't meant to happen, or only meant to happen in exceptional circumstances, and happen the whole time. But I never take the Blessed Sacrament from anybody other than a priest. The extraordinary ministers are there, that's in the name, they're extraordinary. In a church where the congregation is not huge, the Blessed Sacrament should only be touched by the priest. It shouldn't be being touched by random laymen. And the instruction that was issued in 2004 is quite clear on this, that they're not there for routine masses. They are there if you've got one priest in a congregation of 1,000, or you've got a priest who can't drive and can't get round to visit the sick. And it's things like that that undermine the Novus Ordo, because it isn't being done as the norms, as the rubrics require. And that is, I think, a problem. And as I say, Pope Francis said that it should be done properly. But I would also say about the extraordinary form is that it is much more contemplative. there's an awful lot of noise in the new right. Not to mention if the guitars come out, that's the absolute limit. The distracting noise. Whereas in the old right, there is silence, there is prayerfulness. There's much more rich symbolism in the extraordinary form than in the new right. And I think that is very rewarding for those who go. I'll also add as an aside that from my children's point of view, a low mass in the extraordinary form is usually shorter. And that is very popular, particularly with younger children.
Mm-hmm. So would you describe yourself in general as more of a traditional Catholic in terms of your prayer life?
Yeah. I'm very traditional in my Catholic views and in my acceptance of the magisterium of the Church. I don't want the laity running the Church, I want the priests running it. Catholics do not believe in the priesthood of all Christian men. That is a Lutheran belief. I believe in a hierarchical Church with the Pope at the top of it, and I support that.
Okay. Moving quite far away from this topic, I wanted to discuss briefly the current political climate in the UK and the particularly reform and some of the perhaps events that have been occurring recently and how you view that in terms of, is there a Christian hypocrisy in this country, or do you think that it's necessary political, not revolt, but...
I don't think it's to do with faith. I don't think it's a religious issue. I'm actually one of the remaining band of admirers of the former Archbishop of Canterbury. I think he is a genuinely holy man who tried to do good. But when he said that trying to stop the small boats was immoral, I thought he was fundamentally wrong. Mm-hmm. I think allowing people to make journeys where they have a risk of dying is immoral. So I think securing our borders is a perfectly moral and Christian thing to do. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have compassion for the individuals, but you have to make sure that the law works. So no, I don't think it's a Christian issue. I think it's a very worrying democratic deficit issue, because I think people feel they vote, and it doesn't matter how they vote, they get the same form of government.
Yes. Yep.
And they don't like it, and they're fed up with it, and therefore they're thinking of going to extremes. So again, we're lucky in this country that the right-wing extreme is Nigel Farage, who is not a right-wing extremist. He is very much within the normal bounds of political discourse. In the continent, you see them going to really some quite far-right figures, which is much more dangerous. But we are in a better position, and I think we're very lucky to have Nigel Farage and for Reform, which is an outlet for this discontent without being dangerous.
And perhaps this again is slightly more politically focused, but how do you see the political landscape developing in the coming years? And I know that particularly with this Labour government, we're seeing a number of issues on the suppression of freedom of speech. We've just now heard about these digital ID cards in the UK. How do you see the development of the party system in this country with the emergence of new parties in the coming years?
Well, I think we are going through a period of transition. I think as long as we don't change our electoral system, we will ultimately go back to two parties, because that's how the system works. But the Labour Party is in desperate straits at the moment. It has been unable to govern for the last year. Keir Starmer doesn't know what he's doing. The ID card suggestion is one of those things where people go to the Prime Minister and say, look, you're unpopular, you need to do something big and bold, here's something big and bold. You say, well, what problem does it solve? It doesn't solve any problems at all. And the idea that these people coming across on boats will say, oh, I'm not going to because now I've got to have an ID card. They're coming here illegally anyway. It's very trivial. So I think we are in a period of flux. I think the right will at some point unite, I hope before the next election. It may take longer. The left is splintering because the left is very unpopular, and they will have to work out amongst themselves where they go in the end. The Labour Party has had a great ability to regenerate, as with Kinnock and Blair, and indeed with Starmer after Corbyn. Whether it can do that again, because on current polling it's going to be absolutely hammered at the next election, and it's lost its base. its base is no longer routinely voting Labour. And it's got a great split between the metropolitan elite and its core hinterland vote. And that's very hard to put back together again.
I know you've previously said that the Conservative Party has been here for a long, long time and that you think that they will survive. And then you also mentioned the uniting of the parties on the right. Do you think that there is a chance of reform replacing the Conservative Party in a sense, or do you not see that as a viable?
I don't see reform replacing the Conservative Party like that. I think that we agree on the vast bulk of policies and that therefore it makes sense to have some coming together. I think that the worst result would be for the Conservatives and Reform to split the vote of our wing of politics at the next election. But no, I think both parties are here for some time to come. And they may do what we did with the Liberal Unionists in the 1880s. They may come together in some informal or formal pact, and you may then find that in 30 years' time they merge to become one party. But I don't think it's going to happen overnight.
And how do you view the perhaps movement away from more traditional politics and the uptake in political commentary, particularly online political commentary? Do you see that as a risk or a benefit for the right?
I think it's absolutely fascinating, which isn't quite the question you're asking me. It's the disintermediation of media, isn't it? And this is really important because people, instead of having to go to the BBC or ITV, can go to YouTube and watch exactly what they're interested in. They don't have to worry about what other people are interested in. And this allows you as a politician to talk to people directly. So I now do regular messages on YouTube. That's why I was slightly late. I was just finishing one off when you arrived. And this speaks directly to people who are interested in what I've got to say. Whereas if I have to go through the BBC, I have to fit in with what they want to ask me about. And this is really important, and it's a fundamental change in the political conversation. I think it's a thoroughly good thing, because I believe that the random actions of millions of people lead to the better society than our actions being directed by some clever clogs in London. And the BBC is the clever clogs in London, and they think, we'll put on what's good for you, the Reithian view of the BBC, which has declined anyway. But Reith was basically an enormously patronising, condescending fellow who thought he knew what was good for millions of people. I think what you think is good for you is what's good for you. And therefore, if you want to watch my videos, or you want to watch which my children like, the little ones, Ali A. Have you come across Ali A?
No, I haven't.
Ali A, I watch them with Alfred and Sixtus, and they're very funny. And they're sort of slapstick. They're children getting chocolate all over their face, or whatever it is. I mean, it's quite sort of jolly stuff. If that's what you want to watch, that's for you to decide. And if you look at the greatest successes in this country, things like the supermarkets, they don't operate because they're told what to do. They operate because millions of people every day make a decision to go to one supermarket or another. And that's what you're getting with this new media, and I think it's very healthy.
Do you think, though, there may be a risk in when we see the YouTube algorithm and how it behaves and how it pushes people into media that may only show one perspective? Do you think that that can have risks?
Well, I mean, I think that it's probably no different from people looking at the BBC and shouting at it and saying, why is that terrible fellow telling me this awful nonsense? I'm not sure when people listen to things that they don't like, that they're forced to listen to, they're thinking, oh my goodness, that suddenly changed my mind.
Okay.
I think they just think that chap's a rogue.
Mm-hmm.
People feel very strongly about what they see on television.
Yes, yes. Okay, moving back away from politics slightly, and I just wanted to end up with perhaps a particular devotion, saint, or practice that personally sustains you in your daily life as a Catholic.
My devotion is very strongly to Our Lady, as with so many Catholics, and the source, the direction of all my prayers. I say the Rosary every day, and have endlessly found Our Lady's intercession is helpful.
Okay.
Our Lady even finds me parking spaces sometimes. I feel it's a bit naughty to ask for them, but I've been completely stuck and nowhere to park, and one Hail Mary, and it's amazing. Somebody pulls out in front of you. Our Lady is, what would one do without the Blessed Virgin? And my daughter is named, of course, after the Mother of God.
That was going to be my ending, but I'd just like to add one follow-up on the Rosary. Are you opposed to the innovations we've seen with the Rosary in terms of additions to how it is said, or do you keep to those additions? Or?
Well, I wouldn't... Look, Pope St. John Paul II was a hero pope, wonderful man, and of greatest importance, and he added the fourth set of mysteries. But he very kindly said when he did this that if you've already been saying 3, you can stick to the 3. And I stick to the 3. I can't remember what the fourth set of mysteries is. Look, he was such a wonderful man, and what he wanted to do is marvellous. I slightly wish he hadn't done it, because the Rosary had been the Rosary for many hundreds of years and had been given to us by Our Lady, and therefore I couldn't see the point of changing it. But now I stick to the routine of Sunday, glorious, Monday, joyful, Tuesday, sorrowful, Wednesday, glorious, Thursday, joyful, Friday, sorrowful, Saturday, back to glorious. And I stick to that pattern. Though, if Quentin Letts ever watches this, Quentin Letts has written a book called Nunc, which is a very good novel. And it's about St. Simeon and what his life was like. And St. Simeon is the 4th decade of the Joyful Mysteries, the presentation in the temple. And Quentin has written saying that St. Simeon's girlfriend was Anna, the lady who was sweeping up and had been a widow for 80 years in the temple. And blast him, every time I come to 4th Mystery of Joyful, my views on St. Simeon, which were proper holy views beforehand, have been completely undermined by his beastly book. I haven't yet seen him to tell him this, but I will when I do.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to leave it.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you again for coming on and being willing to participate in this.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.